Hi class, it's Professor Marino again from the Fortress of Solitude in Cleveland Heights. In my previous video, I talked about the way the Trisolarans represent, in the three-body problem, represent Western influence, a superior technological outsider power that has perhaps hostile intent towards China, that inevitably the Trisolarans are a figure for the West. Even though inside the novel itself, there are actual Westerners. When Wang Mao first goes to a kind of emergency meeting, he's like, okay, the enemy, and who's the enemy? And realizes that there are American and British military officers here. So who can the enemy be? Those are usually the enemy. Nonetheless, on one level, the Trisolarans absolutely represent foreign, more advanced technological threats to China, represented by the West as it is now and as it has been. I want us to talk about two other things that complicate this, because it's not nearly as simple as that. It's also the case that the Trisolarans represent Chinese culture in a particular way, or especially they represent the emphasis on the group, society, at the expense of the individual. I would look at the way the Trisolaran ruler treats the kind of compassionate SETI operator who tells Jay, don't write back, don't get invaded. And the complaint there is that person is scolded and punished for being an individualist, for putting personal conscience above group survival. This certainly is also a strand in Chinese thinking, and I am not an expert in Chinese history or culture. I'm trying to deal with very big pictures and how they're big picture questions, how they're woven into this pretty subtle and complex novel. The Trisolarans are both the Westerners in certain ways, and they represent certain strands of Chinese leadership culture, not just at this moment. It gets really complicated when we play the three-body game, especially on the on the third and fourth visits. The three-body game is, turns out to be designed by Trisolaris as a way of kind of inculcating human followers with a sense of their culture and kind of getting information across them through this gameplay. And you can imagine what the internet and computer games might be doing to influence East Asia at this moment. It represents in lots of ways. It is a virtual reality multiplayer online game. In many ways, it resembles certain civilization empire builder games. It's very reminiscent in certain details of Sid Meier's Civilization series. What is Civilization? It's a game where you can take on the role of the leader of some culture. You take on the name of some important historical personage. That can be, as in the Trisolaris game and the three-body game, extremely anachronistic, and you try to build world wonders, and you advance technology and move forward and build armies and do all of this stuff, while interacting with other empires who are also kind of fronted by computerized versions of other famous historical figures. So, for Queen Shi Huang to be the first Chinese emperor to be in an argument with Caesar is a very Sid Meier Civilization thing to happen. In fact, having an Egyptian pyramid in the middle of the traditional Chinese empire with warring states, period, kings inside it, that is also the kind of thing that happens. And there's a kind of, in many ways, it's reminiscent. If you don't play this game, don't start now, not during the semester. You just can't afford it. We have enough going on with the switch to online. In that game, there is an East and West phenomenon. Our hero Wang Mao finds out that he can log in either as an Easterner or Westerner, and when in chapter 15, he creates on page 181, he creates a new login as Copernicus, as a Western scientist, And when he shows up, he turns out not to be in King Zhao's pyramid, but to be in a pyramid that looks Gothic, that looks European, and instead of a Chinese emperor inside, there's a pope. There's Pope Gregory. All anachronistic. And at a moment, Wang Miao is like, oh, okay, Pope Gregory, which pope? Can I figure out how advanced the civilization is from the scraps of Western medieval history I know? And I was like, no, don't bother. It's always so anachronistic. People in the game are playing like, he's Copernicus too, who did not meet Pope Gregory, who might not have met this Pope Gregory. And he gets in an argument with Galileo and with Mosey on 183. Here's one of Wang Miao and Cixin Liu's problems. Science itself, experimental science, is transcultural in some ways. The experimental method based on observation is something every culture can do, but it is invented in the West. It comes out of a Western tradition. Wang Miao was already kind of taking on a Western identity by identifying himself with Copernicus. His third login, he gets a new screen name as Copernicus. And the bottom of 182, someone says, oh, you changed your ID, but we all recognize you. I'm Aristotle. You changed your ID, but we all recognize you. In the previous two civilizations, you traveled to the east. Yes, Wang nodded. There I witnessed the destruction of two civilizations, one by extreme cold, another by a blazing sun. I also saw the great efforts that the scholars in the east expended in trying to master the laws governing the sun's motion. Ha! The sound came from a man with a goatee that curled upward. He was even thinner than the Pope. Eastern scholars tried to understand the secrets of the sun's motion through meditation, epiphany, or even dreams. Utterly laughable. This is Galileo, said Aristotle. He advocates understanding the world through observation and experiment. He is an unimaginative thinker, but his results demand our attention. Mosey also conducted experiments in observation, Wang said. Galileo snorted. Mosey's way of thinking was still Eastern. He was nothing more than a mystic dressed as a scientist. He never took his own observation data seriously, and he constructed his model based on subjective speculation. Ridiculous. I feel sorry for his refined equipment. So here's a problem with the history of science. On the one level, Wang Miao as a scientist wants to have loyalty to the Chinese scientific tradition, but has to admit the superiority of the Western tradition in physics, although he, as a Chinese scientist in the 21st century, is trying to pick that up and do it in a Chinese way. Let's skip ahead to chapter 17, where Copernicus / Wang Miao shows up now and meets Qin Shi Huang, the first Chinese emperor, the founder of the dynasty that gives China its name. And he's like, yeah, you're very clever. You're that clever Copernicus. And his first thing is, and he and Wang Miao as Copernicus and some other player or non-player character as the physicist, the scientist von Neumann are like, hey, we're going to start a computer. And there's a kind of sense of, can you create a computer without transistors by using people? A kind of human computer, if you have enough people in a kind of big Chinese imperial square, can you make it happen? And first Qin Shi Huang's like, go get Caesar. Get Caesar. And they're like, no, you can't. Even if, on page 210, even if Caesar could organize an army of 30 million, it would not have the quality and strength necessary to perform this great calculation. I am aware of that, Qin Shi Huang said. But Caesar is waking up and reinvigorating his army. The wisdom of Westerners is terrifying. You are not more intelligent than the men of the East, but you can see the right path. For example, Copernicus could figure out that there are 3 suns, and you could come up with your 3 laws. These are very impressive accomplishments. We here in the East cannot, for now, match them. I don't possess the ability to conquer Europe. My ships are not good enough, and the supply lines cannot be maintained for long enough to go over land. That's why your empire must continue to develop, Great Emperor. Von Neumann seized the opportunity. And we move on to von Neumann's human computer plan. Here's the problem. It's instead inside the Chinese novel. The Westerners are not smarter, but their tradition is productive in a way that Chinese scientists sometimes in this novel sometimes feel despairing of, that they see that the Westerns are onto something that the Chinese themselves are not, and this is a source of frustration, something the novel is wrestling with in one way or another on every single page.